Welcome to Massey College. My name is Nathalie Desrosiers, and I'm the principal of Massey College. Massey College, where I am today, is located on Indigenous land that has been occupied and inhabited by many Indigenous people and communities. It's the land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. I want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship to the land and also the great privilege that I have to continue to work here. And I said all this land acknowledgement with lots of trepidation today, because that's the very subject of our little workshop today. The panel discussion that we have is about land acknowledgement. Why do we have them? How to do it well? What do they mean? And how important are they for reconciliation? So, and today I have a fabulous panel, and I want to thank them so much for agreeing to do this with us today. So, first, we'll hear from Justice Harry LaForme. He is Anishinaabe, he's a member of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and he was born and raised on the reserve, but certainly had to leave to continue and develop his career. He graduated from law school. He was called to the Ontario Bar in 1979. He articled for Osler, Hoskin Harcourt, a big law firm in Toronto, and he also specialized there in Indigenous law. He was appointed to the bench in January of 1994. He was appointed to the Superior Court of Justice and was at that time only one of three Indigenous judges ever to have been appointed at that trial. And then when he was appointed to the Court of Appeal, the Ontario Court of Appeal, in November of 2004, he was the first Indigenous person to be appointed to sit on an appellate court. He's retired in October in 2018. He's a senior fellow of Massey College. He's received many honors, and it's a real honor for us to have you again with us, Justice LaForme. You've
Okay.
participated in our program before, and I'm so grateful for your presence.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's always a pleasure to appear on the show. I'm a big fan of Massey College and what it does.
Mhm.
I guess you want me to go into what I want to
Well,
say
I
about.
want to I want to just say the reason why I invited you particularly is I was very taken by what you said in a speech at Massey College a couple of years ago before the pandemic
Right?
about
Yeah,
how
a
important
lifetime ago.
a lifetime ago when you talked about land acknowledgement. So
Right.
and the role of them. So yeah, why do we have them? Why is it
Okay.
important? Yeah.
Um, I think it's important to note right off the beginning that not everybody agrees with land acknowledgements being something that other communities in Canada should be doing. And in fact, I'm surprised, to be honest with you, that it's risen so in recent times to so many people expressing their displeasure or their doubts about land acknowledgements. And I first, before I get into it, let me just read you an example of, and these are supposed to be, these are supposedly intelligent people who claim they have thought about this, but one wonders when you read about it. For example, in June this year, a writer by the name of Matthew Lau, writing a piece in the Financial Post, which of all places, is supposed to be kind of an intellectual news source. And he titled the piece as "The Trouble with Land Acknowledgements." And then he goes on to say there are very good reasons for rejecting the land acknowledgements on the basis that they are simply wrong. I don't know who Matthew Lau is, for example, but I don't know why he would know more about land acknowledgements than the people that are on your show today who actually
Mhm.
come from a First Nation and grew up and learned this from their ancestors. But apparently he does. In any place Mr. Lau then gives examples to support his opinion. And one of those examples is my First Nations land claim settlement for the Toronto Purchase lands that first occurred in 1787 under a treaty and was ultimately settled in 2010. And then he states that there was no theft on the land yet, the federal government noting that the current relationship ownership of the land is not in question, nevertheless paid $145 million to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation in compensation for the British Crown having obtained too good a price for the land over 2 centuries earlier. Without going into it, I mean, he just exhibits right there. He knows nothing about the history of what took place in that regard. And regardless, he says, it does not make sense to suggest, as the land acknowledgements do, that people today owe apologies or reparations for things that other people did over 2 centuries ago. You know, it's that old saw, get over it. And for most Canadians, he finishes with this. Knowledge about who previously lived on their land is not something that needs to be kept in their brain attics. And the space could be used to store other knowledge of more practical usefulness. And I can't even begin to express how ignorant that article is. And yet it's posted in something like the Financial Post, which supposedly really bright people read. That isn't what land acknowledgements are about. They're, and from the perspective of Indigenous people, they're not about settlement. Settlement negotiations and whether somebody owns the land or something, that's completely irrelevant to the issue of land acknowledgements. Though courts and settlement negotiations take care of that. What land acknowledgements should be about, and my colleagues will have more in-depth to say about this, and it should be about the heartfelt declaration that acknowledges that Indigenous peoples on the land, and at the same time recognize your position as, you know, settlement governments, settler governments, Canadians. It should be about a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. It doesn't speak about ownership or theft or anything like that. We know some of that happened, but I told you the place that gets resolved is either in the courts or in negotiations. We've got processes that address that. Nothing to do with land acknowledgements. It should commemorate Indigenous people's principal kinship to the land and the fact that we've not ever erased ourselves from that in our collective first mother. That is, you know, the planet in our territory, the Turtle Island. Professor Metallic, I think, speaks to it a little bit, and when she says, it should signal to you that to think about how for over 150 years, Indigenous peoples have been marginalized and pushed to the corners of society, prevented from engaging in their own traditional substance activities or benefiting from the wealth that many Canadians have gotten off these lands. And you notice she starts that with, it should be a signal to you to think about that. It isn't something that somebody wants to throw out there and say that you have to now feel horrible about it or anything. It's just think about it and appreciate that that's part of the history. Land acknowledgements are about, it should serve to disrupt your notions of the invisibility and ongoing erasure of Indigenous peoples. And we're just learning that happened. And we're lucky that it didn't happen in the successful manner that it was intended. We're still here. And think about that. It's a recognition of a truth. Think of it as a kind of verbal memorial in honor of Indigenous people. Nothing wrong with that. It's an act of reconciliation. And it's a small but powerful one. Reconciliation. And we're all trying to do that. We're all trying to identify that and do that. A land acknowledgement should not, however, be some rote statement like a reminder of a bake sale or something like that. Rather, it should be heard and listened to, thought about, and then acted upon to acknowledge the truth of it. I mean, even if that act is a 10-minute trip through Google to educate yourself. And I think that you should be careful when you, if indeed you do take this little trip through Google, that this, you'll likely run across Mr. Lau's opinion as well as those of many others who believe it's all about retribution rather than reconciliation. And as I said, it's that old saw, let's get over it. So those are the things that I think are important. It's not about us blaming you for theft or you wanting to feel guilty about what it's an act, and it's an acknowledgement of our prior occupation. Nobody can deny that this was our territory as Indigenous people. That's a fact. We all know that. And to simply ask people out there and acknowledge the fact that it was, that we lived a different life and cared more for the territory in a different way than other people might, and to keep our history alive. And it's, as I said, an act of reconciliation in it. And it's not meant to be any more than that, other than that, get serious about learning about who we are and the first inhabitants of the land that you now call home. It's as simple as that. Miigwech.
Okay. Miigwech. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to go to our to Councillor Irma Farrel now to ask her why it is important to her. So, Councillor, just so I introduce you first in a proper way, she's a member of the Mississaugas of Accredited First Nation. She's resided there most of her life. She was born in the Lady Willington Hospital located on the neighboring First Nation, has been working for the Mississaugas, and she built a home there that her parents, on a property that her parents gave her. And she's been really employed in the education aspect of the Mississaugas for 16 years. So, Councillor Farrell, when you've been elected as a councillor, and I think it's the 10th year that you're a councillor. So, congratulations surviving this. So, why is it important to you when people make land acknowledgement?
When we are, first of all, thank you, Natalie, for having me here today. But when people contact us regarding a land acknowledgement, there are certain words that I look for. And that is sincerity, respect, and knowing the land that you are on and how you put it together is important to me. But because of email and video calls and telephone calls, you can't always tell if the person on the other end is being sincere. But we are always willing to sit down with whoever wants to put together a land acknowledgement. The other thing I look for is when the land acknowledgement is completed, that it is factual. And Justice LaForme said, we are still here. When people thought hundreds of years ago, if we did certain things, we would go away. Well, we didn't. And it is important to me that when you are on the land, you know who was there. You know who walked before you. And when putting together a land acknowledgement, you don't have to please everyone. It's important that it is factual. The accuracy that will come out in the land acknowledgement would mean a lot to the treaty holders of the land. And that, again, the word respect always keeps coming back into the things I say about land acknowledgements. And one of the things, and I will repeat it, that the treaty holders should be at the top of the list. And I'm going to think long and hard about that article that Justice LaForme was talking about, because I believe in lifelong learning. And one of the things in lifelong learning is When you write something, is it factual? And again, here's a prime example of somebody who wrote something and had it put in the paper, and it's not all factual. But thank you, Natalie.
Well, thank you. And let's hear now from Darrenwabenga, who was on our at Massey just a couple of days ago, talking about the history of the Mississaugas, and the title was "We're Still Here." So I think it's a fabulous way to have you again here, and just to introduce briefly, Darren, educator in elementary school in Ontario, specializing in geography and history, was vice principal, curriculum coordinator. He's worked at the Mississaugas Accredited First Nation as the traditional knowledge and land use coordinator, and really has worked really to 10 years as the librarian of the community, and making sure that we continue to understand and respect the history. So, Darren, why is that important? Why land acknowledgements are important in your view?
Uh, well, especially nowadays, anyway, when we've heard all the tragedies of residential schools and so on in the last little while, it's popped up in the news, and we hear a lot of talk of reconciliation. And for me, one of the ways of starting that topic, starting that discussion of what reconciliation is opening up with a land acknowledgement, starting up who who lives on the land, who lived on the land, who stewarded the land, who occupied it, that sort of thing, and then we can begin having a dialogue, a chance to get to know each other. So to me, often land acknowledgements are just an opening ploy, an opening in a conversation where we can actually get together and begin to see where each other stands. That's what I see them for initially.
And they are, I mean, I thought I was struck when, if we are all together, the three of us, to discuss a little bit this importance of the land acknowledgements, is the acknowledgement of resisting the erasure, which the invisibility of Indigenous people, I think, is the reason why I would want to do it. But then some people, and I know the question why we're having this workshop is, many of the junior fellows, the students here who come from other countries, are afraid. They are afraid of not knowing the history, and
Right.
maybe it's all our duty to know the history of where we go, where we stand, and when we are. And similarly, when you travel, you should know whose land it was. They're afraid of making a mistake, or not acknowledging the right landholder. Does that Should they worry about that? Let's start with you,
Uh,
Darren.
yeah. Yeah. Uh, Personally, sincerity covers a multitude of sins, as far as I'm concerned. Uh, I've heard people ask me, I do lots of land acknowledgements in my work. People contact me all the time. They ask me about pronunciation of words. They ask me about who the people are that actually lived on the land. They ask me a multitude of things. And I'm always very happy they're asking. It shows to me their
Yeah.
sincerity, that they're willing to do the job. I don't care about the mistakes necessarily.
Mhm,
I'll help them with that. But what I want to see is the sincerity, the genuine nature of their inquiry. And we can do a lot if people are genuine moving forward in sincerity. On the other hand, I've had people too that just phoned me up. A company phoned me up not too long ago. We want a land acknowledgement for our website. And they just phoned me up out of the blue. They wanted one, and they wanted me to turn one out in 2 or 3 minutes that they could type out in and put on their website. I have no time for those types of people.
mhm,
I very politely told them this is the bare bones for land acknowledgement. Go and write it, and if you get it done, call me and I'll critique it for you. Never heard from them since. I didn't think it was very genuine, and yes, I simply don't have time for that type of thing. But if you're genuine, don't worry about mistakes. That you can reach out to us and we can help you with that.
mhm.
So no problem with that. Don't worry about making mistakes.
That's true. Well, that's reassuring since I know we're going to get to my land acknowledgement and kind of put it a little bit under the microscope here. But Harry, anything that you would tell these students, that particularly international students, arriving from different countries and being a little bit scared that their knowledge of Canada is lacking?
Well, I mean, the easy thing to do, when we have a teacher amongst us, and one of the easiest things to do about not knowing something about whatever it is you're concerned with is to search it out and make inquiries. And, there's nothing wrong with that, because that, in my view, is precisely what a land acknowledgement tries to initiate and tries to convey to the listener. It's that, there was a history here before European settlement occurred, before there was a Canada. There was a history. Wouldn't you like to know about that history? Oh, and by the way, the people in that history are still here. They evolved along with everybody else, maybe not as nice as everybody else, but there's a history, and some of it is sad. Nevertheless, that history is still there. You want to live someplace, it's like Darin said, wherever you go. Maybe it was you and Natalie that said that. You go someplace, you visit someplace, and wouldn't you like to know the history of that place and who occupied this before, if for no other reason than to just have an appreciation of where you're living or where you're visiting. And that's all a land acknowledgement is supposed to do. But it's supposed to be one that's given sincerely too, not one that just says, it's not like howdy. It's supposed to convey a sincere message to people that sincerely listen. And if you do that, then the words hardly matter.
Irma, when you travel in other communities, then I assume that our responsibility, I think, is always to look to the history. So, and the history is different. If you go to in Ottawa, it was a different land acknowledgement in Ottawa because it was a different community that lived there before. So is that what you suggest? Is that when people move from one community to the next, their obligation is just to know who was there before? Is that?
I think it's important to, like I said before, I believe in lifelong learning, and learning about the land and who lived there to me is important. One year we traveled to the United States, and I picked up all the tourist catalogs, and I read all the history of each state out loud while my husband was driving to learn about the area that we were in. So you appreciated what the people in that area went through and a couple hundred years ago, and makes you appreciate where they have come. And I just wanted to share one thing. We were at the CNE and we had a booth at the CNE. And one lady said something to me that kind of surprised me, but I wasn't totally surprised, in that when we were handing out our information and sharing with this individual, and she said, "This is really nice." She said, "I didn't know you were still here." And so to me, land acknowledgements can start that conversation of, oh, they were here? Oh, they're still here? And so that's what I think in the basis of the land acknowledgement is education. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's so. Why don't we go then? I think we've seen the why. The how is the sincerity and the genuine desire to know, and the obligation, a sense of responsibility about knowing on whose land you are. Now, maybe you could go and kind of do a soft criticism of the one that we use, that I usually say at Massey College, which is the one that I did today. What are the things that how would you improve it? Is Darin? I think you may have some.
Yeah. I always wonder how to approach these things and be nice about it, because I'm not too hostile. I'm not a very hostile person. So when
It's okay. I am, Darin.
Somebody will make it
I'm
up
just
for
kidding.
me.
I'm kidding.
the things I look for in a land acknowledgement when I'm helping people,
Yeah.
I always want to see
Right.
specificity in it. If you're in a specific location, that's what I want to hear the land acknowledgement about. If you're in the middle of, I don't know, you're in Toronto, and Toronto's a big place, but if you're in Toronto proper, that little area that's actually Toronto proper downtown, make your acknowledgement about that specific area. Because one
Yeah.
of the things, for example, I found in Toronto when doing these things, I hear talk about uh, other First Nations, and first when I started doing these things, I thought, hey, we're the treaty holders and traditional people in Toronto,
Yeah.
and they're talking about Chippewas, and they're talking about
Darrenwabenga.
Ojibways, and all kinds of things. I'm thinking, hey, we're the treaty holders. So
Yeah.
one of the things I want to see, and one of my criticisms of yours,
Okay.
is there's
Great.
no specific recognition of the treaty holders, the
Okay.
Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And I think that's important because as part of our history, we are the ones that, I guess for better or worse, struck the deal that allowed the settlement
To take
of
place.
the Toronto area, Toronto region, and that it's us that lost our ability to sustain ourselves on the land that you now occupy in Toronto.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of an issue. So I always look for, are you recognizing the treaty holders?
Yeah.
I know Massey is located in that downtown core of Toronto, but if you're talking about the Greater Toronto area, you also have to refer to the Williams Treaty folks farther to the
Yeah.
west, or pardon me, to the east.
Yeah.
So it's a very complex thing, but always be specific as to where you are and always refer to the treaty holders. The other thing I did like about your acknowledgement was that you, as far as I'm concerned, you didn't leave anyone out. You included the other people that have stewarded the land for the years, the Haudenosaunee folks,
Yeah.
and also the Huron-Wendat folks, if I remember rightly. So that was good. That's another principle. Don't leave anybody out that has stewarded the land. Give everybody their credit that's coming to them in history. And so that was fine. So my criticism, it's not too bad.
So
It's not too
okay,
bad.
I'm B minus. Maybe. So
Well, there's other things. At least
yeah.
one thing I at least you didn't open it up too much in terms of way of controversy sometimes. I think also try and be, and this is not a critique of you specifically or your land acknowledgement, is avoid controversy as well. One of the problems I have, and this is a big bugaboo in my ear when I see these things, is this reference in so many land acknowledgements in the Toronto area to the dish with one spoon treaty and agreement. You know, where it's used in land acknowledgements and it's meant to say, well, we're all on this land together and let's share the resources in the spirit of the Treaty of the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. And I've read the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. I'm familiar with the Great Peace of Montreal and the agreement between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee about that. And I don't see anything about sharing the resources of Southern Ontario in that particular treaty. So,
So yeah.
so I kind of
Good.
resent that. But you know what? I also say this: you're not going to find a First Nation person anywhere that's going to disagree with the wise stewardship of land use, water, whatever. We're not going to, be disappointed about that. We're allies in the wise stewardship. But to attribute it to a treaty that really doesn't talk about that,
Yeah.
I have a bit of a problem with that.
Yeah. I'm with Darren on that one. I would also say that I would start it off, and this is a bit a bugaboo with me as well, Darren,
Okay.
that when people do these land acknowledgements, especially with Toronto, that they seem to we get relegated to the last. Well, we actually have, from a legal standpoint,
Right. The first.
yes, indeed,
Yeah.
we have the treaties, we have you know, we have the surrenders of the territory that became Toronto. I mean, we were the ones who, you know, the Haudenosaunee didn't, although I suspect that they're challenging that now. But that's our history with the Haudenosaunee. I mean, that's we've had that for centuries, and but that is. I mean, all you have to do is in law, for example, you if you were just going to do it, never mind what it means socially or anything like that or historically, but in law, if you were going to recite that,
Yeah.
yeah, you would do it. We would be first.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we need to be first or anything like that, but it does. The people that look up where the Toronto Purchase or the Mississaugas of the Credit, for example, if they saw that, if they looked into their history, they'd say, "Oh, well, they were the folks that surrendered the land that became Toronto," and that's forgotten in most land acknowledgements, and it's important,
Good point.
but it's not essential.
No, it's a good point.
It's
a good point.
It's accurate.
Yeah. What about you, Irma? Anything that you'd like to see added or deleted from it?
I don't know so much as deleted. Again, I go back to that first line of, let's say, Massey College
Yes.
sits on the land of treaty holders, Mississaugas of the Credit. And I'm sure Darin can take that sentence and mold it better than what I can. But to me, that's important. And what comes after that can be what you feel is most respectful to the people. Again, the factual part of that statement. And what I wanted to say before was some people talk very loudly, and I'm talking about First Nations people, and say, well, your land acknowledgement is incorrect because I'm not in it. And to me, just because they speak up, the facts aren't behind them. And what both Darin and Justice LaForme have been saying is the facts are there. And we know that from, and Justice LaForme was part of that Toronto Purchase argument in court. Everything is written down. And that's the
Yeah.
thing we learn through research that the British wrote it down. It's there, it's factual. So that part is important. And like I said, the land acknowledgement is yours, Natalie, to phrase the way you want. But I'm just saying from my own perspective that first line always be the land, the treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit. Thanks, Natalie.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Natalie, that what I think the message is that the whole purpose of the land acknowledgement is to trigger your thinking about the history of this land, to think about that Indigenous people were here, they surrendered the land that became Toronto. Gee, I want to know about that. That their stewardship to the land, for example, is still there. That's supposed to be what a land acknowledgement triggers. It's supposed to make you think about that greater history that we have, and especially with Indigenous people. I mean, we're constitutionally set apart.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like we're just sort of wandering through here. I mean, we have more provisions in the Constitution of Canada than anybody else, including Quebec. So, I mean, you would think that is a signal that, wow, that they played an important part in Canada.
Yeah.
Let's learn about that, and that's kind of what this is supposed to at least part of it. What should trigger?
So we have a land acknowledgement, and anything else that you think in beginning a meeting you would like Massey College to do, or something? Are there other important messages to raise? And I know that Harry, you want to talk about
Yes,
this.
I
So
do,
I
and I think this is really important. And to the extent that you can, and language could be incorporated this way, but I think it should be said not in a way that just it's a recitation of something, but I think you should make it clear that this is an introduction to an important piece of history that maybe you might want to learn more about, you know, because reconciliation is directly connected to that. And I don't know how you say that or anything. I've never really thought about it, but I guess it's to take away from that roteness of it. You know, oh, tomorrow there's going to be a bake sale. You know, it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
It should really
Yeah.
impact people when it's done and sincerely.
And if there, so this is another issue that came up that in the question: is it appropriate if there is an Indigenous person in the room to ask them to make the land acknowledgement, or is it appropriate, more appropriate that the head of college do it?
Darin?
Well, yeah. I'm going to say something there too, because somebody just asked me today again about this.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes this phone call comes to me too.
Yeah.
Would you come out and do a land acknowledgement for us? And I always respond, no. As a First Nations person, I know to whom the land,
Yeah.
our relationship to the land. It's for you to
Yeah.
give the acknowledgement. It's for your education, for you to acknowledge who the treaty holders are, the traditional territory holders are. So I always say, invite an elder, yes, invite drummers or singers, whatever you want. They can receive the land acknowledgement and say some nice words of response that you've delivered one,
Make
but
what?
don't make them do it. Don't
Yeah.
make them do it.
Yeah.
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 There's
And that's what
there's
it
two,
is. And you're right.
well
That's what it is. It's not an acknowledgement
well
unless it comes from a person that has right. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
two parties to this whole thing of reconciliation,
Mm-hmm.
Natalie, and you know, we're not speaking on our own behalf. We're speaking on your behalf as well, and we're passing it on. You know, treaties do have two sides to the treaties too. There's two parties to those treaties. You know, there's Indigenous people and there's the, I guess the people that now have inherited those treaty obligations. Which is Canada, and those treaties have two parties to them. And so the respect would be, if this is treaty territory, you get to say it as much as I do about that, because you're a treaty partner.
Yeah. Irma, any thoughts on that?
Well, I was thinking about last week when you introduced your guests up to the podium, and you took that upon yourself to welcome them. And that probably meant a lot to them, as opposed to them you telling them, okay, walk up to the mic and introduce yourself. Because that's the same way I would look at, oh, you're an Indigenous person, stand up and do the land acknowledgement, the same as both Justice LaForme and Darin were saying. So that's how I look at it. And then you want to go to like a bigger venue, tell the Prime Minister to introduce himself when he walks in the room. It's kind of like the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and Darin is correct. You know, the land we do know this land was occupied by us before. If you want to make a land acknowledgement, I mean, you're the one that has to do it. It's the sincerity comes from you.
Yeah. So another question. I'm reading these questions that came from different people here. Is it appropriate to shorten it, or to say, is it appropriate to, do you have to do it more than once in an event, or is it appropriate to say we started this morning with the land acknowledgement and I refer back to it? So that's what I guess that's an efficient person, or what do you think? Is there an obligation to refer to? My sense is that there's an obligation to refer to it at the beginning of the proceedings.
Yeah, and what you said, Natalie, I like that. I hadn't thought about that, but you know, if you're at a 3-day conference on some territory and you acknowledge at the front end, and you do like a very sincere, historically based
That's it. Yeah.
land acknowledgement and are sincere about it, then the next day, I'm not sure that you have to do it all over again, but to simply acknowledge that, we did this and let's think about that. I hadn't thought about that, but I think that's a pretty good idea.
So I think those were pretty much the questions that the junior fellow had sent. I guess that next time we will be in together and they can ask themselves more questions and reflect a little bit on the responsibility that we all have. Oh, Akash has a question. When I hear politicians say land acknowledgements, I wonder why they rarely respect the consequent responsibilities. Or land acknowledgement being misused to create illusions of empathy and mask the reality of inactions? That's a yeah, good question. Okay, let's start with you, Irma, and then we'll go to Harry and Darren. Erma, how do you feel about that?
There is some truth to that. So yes, basically, if you know anything about the political person who's speaking, you can hear it in the way that they say it, and that's what I look for. I read body language, I look at facial expression, and I look at the emphasis they put on certain words, and you can tell whether or not they are being sincere. So yeah, they do.
I would say the same thing. I don't know. Natalie, I know you, and I know Massey College, and I know the sincerity with which the Land Acknowledgement is made. So I have no difficulty, even with the words you use, because I know there's sincerity behind it.
So let's hear from Clara Fraser. How can one, an individual, an institution, avoid the routinization of a land acknowledgement? Or ask other way, when do you think its routinization becomes a concern, would be a concern? Darin, why don't we start with you?
I get from the question that means just coming up routinely, right?
That's
just
it.
Doing
It's
over and over again.
very big. Yeah.
I think you have to pick and choose your times when to do it. It doesn't have to happen at every meeting or every gathering. Main ones, if you're going to have a big event, of course you're going to do a land acknowledgement. But if you're going to do it just as getting through the minutes for a board meeting, and no kidding, it happens. I know it does. I know it does. Yeah, we're on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas Credit First Nation. Done. Bam. Gone.
Okay.
I even say don't even bother with it. Just leave us out of it, because that's disrespectful. Disrespectful. But if you can do it in a manner where it shows some respect at an important Board of Governors meeting, when you have special guests, when you have special events, that's fine. One of my problems with schools sometimes, I'm starting to really think about this as a former teacher too. How effective is it to come up on the PA system every morning? We're on the traditional treaty lands and territory of the Mississauga Nation while we're in Peel region.
Yeah.
I wonder about that. And then the thing that bothers me even more. Okay, so what are they teaching the history about that?
Yeah.
They're providing lip service in the land acknowledgement in the morning, but is it being played out in the history class or the social studies class or wherever class is supposed to be taught in? So it's got to be actions, yes, and actions along with the words, but routine. Keep it special. And if you find you're hearing it too much and you're rolling your eyes every time a land acknowledgement comes up, you're doing something wrong.
So, Darren, do we still have a Pledge of Allegiance or anything like that in school? Do you know?
You know what? They weren't even singing "O Canada" by the time I was done.
Okay.
There is very little in the way of opening exercises anymore.
Yeah.
So that's a bit tragic, but yeah.
Interesting. So
I don't know. I don't like it when they do it at basketball games.
Okay. So there, I think the sincerity, accurateness, presenting it as the beginning of a conversation or beginning of a sense of reflection on the role of history and preventing the erasure and the forgetting. And
Yep.
so that's what I got. I think meeting it with meaning it, like having words to mean it. So Kim Kieran says, there is a land acknowledgement the place to ask the audience to consider, for example, the 94 calls to actions in the TRC report.
I think any time's a good time to do that. Yeah.
And probably also reflect on the ones that are specifically
Yeah.
addressed to the institutions. I think is that's part a little bit of the sincerity, transparency, and not paying lip service, is to just kind of own the responsibility, I would think.
Yeah, and Darin makes a good point, though, and I mean, you don't want to add so much to it that eyes start rolling and people start snoring. That's. I think it's short, snappy, sincere, and factual.
Yeah, that's it.
So, any other questions from our audience? We're coming to the end of our time here, and I just want I'm going to give you each the time to make final remarks about this subject and about the message that you want to send to the Massey community and to the junior fellows that listen to it. So, Darin, do you want to start?
Oh my! No, you didn't let me have time to think about this, so now I got to think about it. But I suppose I appreciate land acknowledgements. I really love it when the treaty holders, the traditional territory holders, are recognized for their place in the past, and that they have an enduring presence to this very day, that we're still here. So land acknowledgement does that. It recognizes that continual presence on the land and our close connection to it, and it'll bring to mind for many people the history. It'll ask them, how did we get here? How did Canada develop? So I love that. I can't emphasize enough: sincerity, sincerity, sincerity. Always
Yeah.
be sincere in what you say, and like I said earlier, that will cover a multitude of sins, a multitude of mistakes, whatever. But please be sincere about it.
Thank you, Irma. Final words.
Yeah, I had a thought there and it left me for a second. But I'm just going to repeat what Justice LaForme said about you, Natalie. And I enjoy coming to Massey College because you are always respectful to us and everything that you do. And I appreciate the fact that you keep our name front and center, and the invitations come often to join you in events either online or in person. And again, the beginning of a land acknowledgement will help people to think. And I think both Darin and Justice LaForme has said that it's the beginning of asking the question, well, where did they come from? And then they find out, hey, they were already here when we got here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Irma, if you get your other thoughts, just continue to send us your good wisdom. I think we want to continue this conversation in many other forms. Justice LaForme, the last word is to you.
Oh, goodness.
Dangerous.
Okay. First of all, I would say thank you for what Irma says is absolutely true. I found the same thing with Massey College and you, Natalie. The sincerity is always there. You can feel it. You can hear it. And it for us. I mean, it's to say how an Indigenous person might feel about that kind of sincerity. I don't know if I could describe that to you, but it's a pretty special feeling. And so that's important. The sincerity, I mean, I don't know what to say more than that. I mean, that is so critical and so crucial. And I would go one step further and I would say, I really do hope that it triggers questions in people's mind that hear it, because that's got to be a good thing. And if you're somebody like this Matthew Rao or somebody like that, I mean, it's not, because they believe what they want to believe, and you're not going to change that. But when I go to an event like this with people from my home and hear the discussion that we've had, I immediately want to thank the people and your young people, your young fellows, for that have raised this as an issue of interest for them. I can't tell you how exciting that makes me feel, that our young people care about something like that. It's terrific, and it brought about this discussion, which I think is really a critical discussion. And I say miigwech to all of them.
Well, and I say miigwech to all of you for participating today. Thank you so much. And we do want to have this discussion in person one day with the junior fellows who wanted this to happen. Miigwech.
Miigwech.
Miigwech.